I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Bill, this time a tragic situation in Chicago. A security guard intervenes in the case of a shooting that could have turned into a mass shooting at a nightclub and stops the shooter. Police arrive on the scene and shoot the security guard. You may have heard of this story.
I did not.
Yes, the security guard is a young black man who, when the police arrived on the scene, had his knee in the back of the gunman who he had stopped from the shooting. Witnesses say they shouted that the guy was a security guard. Police say that police officers gave the command to him to put down his weapon. Witnesses say they didn't hear any such command, and the police shot and killed this young man. He was planning, apparently, to become a police officer. That's what he was training to do. And Bill, now obviously there are lots of details in this case, and everything we have right now is hearsay. So I don't want to ask you to react, obviously, to the specifics of this case. But this is one of those cases where a common thing that you hear from conservatives is that it takes a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. And in this case, a good guy with a gun got killed after stopping a bad guy with a gun. How do we communicate our ideas in the wake of something like this?
I think the first thing we should do is make sure that this guy's family never needs anything again. This is just an absolute nightmare. I had not heard the story before you told me about it. Is this a thought you've ever had, Scott, by the way, that this might happen to you?
Actually, when you go through concealed carry training, as we did here in Texas, one of the things they talk about is that when police arrive on the scene, it is very difficult for the police to figure out what's going on in the spur of the moment, and that you should do everything you can to present the minimum threat to the arriving police officers.
That's pretty much what I would expect as well. Everybody, I think, who's taken the responsibility for this seriously, people who are sort of mentally prepare themselves to be able to do something like what this young hero did, is stop these mass murderers. If frequently I will consider as part of that, how do I behave when the police arrive, and what a tragedy it would be if they shot the wrong guy. And this is just an absolute nightmare scenario. Sometimes it seems to me it's very difficult for me to put myself in the shoes of a police officer who's been called out to the scene of a multiple shooting, active shooter, that kind of thing. It's very easy to sit here, fat, stupid, and happy, and say, well, should have done this, shouldn't have done that. You don't really know until you're in that situation. But if what you say is true, if not only people shouted not to shoot the guy, but they did not hear any of the policemen basically saying drop your gun, then this looks like a manslaughter case to me. We hold policemen to a very high standard, and we need to hold them to a high standard. That's why they're empowered to use lethal force. I've never heard of a story like this before, so you can try to put some kind of perspective on it, but I don't feel like putting much perspective on this. To me, it's just a cold-blooded tragedy of a situation, and I don't know what the answer to this one is, Scott. I don't know if it's more police training. I don't know if I just don't know.
Well, of course, there are some on the left who, and I shouldn't just say on the left, I should say there are some in the community and some on the left, and other people who just read the story and say, what a horrible tragedy, who naturally assume that because of it's a black guy getting shot by a police officer, that it's like so many others which are portrayed as being a rash of black guys getting shot by police officers, that the implication is if I had been the one, with my gun to that guy with my knee in his back, that I would have been less likely to have been shot simply because I'm white. And I think in a case like this, Bill, I mean, maybe you disagree with me, but I think there's an opportunity to communicate here on the part of people who believe in the Second Amendment and conservatives in a way that's clear that justice is the desired outcome, not any sort of racial bias. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. You understand what I'm saying?
Without question, justice needs to be done here. And I think that to the degree that you can, there's no bringing the man back, and that's what he was, by the way. There's no bringing him back. There's no way to make his family whole. There is no. It's simply off the table. It's gone. So, to me, justice, as close to justice as we can possibly get in this human world of ours, consists of two things. First of all, it consists of a very serious, extremely serious investigation into this matter to determine whether or not the policeman who did the shooting had any reasonable expectation that his life was in danger. If it turns out that it was, look, if there's a doubt about it, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to the policeman. But if it turns out that there was no evidence that his life was in danger, that he was just trigger happy, then he needs to face the full consequences of this. You know, this is, as you say, I wasn't there, you weren't there, we don't know any of the details. But if, as the story unfolded the way you said some of the witnesses said, this man commits this incredibly heroic act. He's basically subdued a guy. He can't just let the guy run off. It's not like the guy tried to steal a pair of sneakers. He's there to kill everybody. So he's on the guy's back with his knee in his back. He's got a gun pointed at him appropriately enough because the guy's done some shooting. I don't see a person like that, especially a guy who wants to be a police officer. I'm talking about the hero now. He doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who's going to panic when the police come in. It seems to me like he's expecting the police to come in. And he's expecting the police to come in with their guns drawn. And he's expecting to be able to say, it's not me, I'm just on the scene here. So it sounds to me like a case of a policeman. Again, Scotty, I hate to speculate like this, but
sure.
again,
and there's so much we don't know.
Here we are. So if you've got a guy who's got the heroism to do this, you've got a guy who's got the moral courage to stand up and intervene in a situation like this, and especially if this young man had a desire to be a police officer, I think that's even more damning for the police not having been there. You would assume that somebody like that would not be so stupid as to just turn around and point the gun at the policeman when they come in and say, you know, who the hell are you?
Now, the security guard had a license to own the gun. According to the report I read, he did not have a concealed carry permit, but the report didn't say whether he was carrying concealed or not.
Was he in uniform?
He was. There's dispute over that as well. Witnesses in the crowd say he was wearing a hat that said security. Police officer or the police report said the officer didn't see any identification that would indicate that he was security. And so
it wasn't like there were badges or patches or anything like that on it.
Yeah, that's not clear, and I don't want to go too far down that road. But I guess in this situation, conservatives often say that the cities would be a better place if more law-abiding citizens could arm themselves. I guess people in those neighborhoods might wonder right now, hey, is this just putting our black friends in greater jeopardy if they do arm themselves?
That is a legitimate concern. And to those people who say, see, this whole thing doesn't work, I would point out to them, no, the system worked perfectly. It wasn't the good guy with the gun that failed. It was the police that failed. It was the fallback position that the liberals had. Well, wait till the police arrive. Well, the police arrived and they shot the wrong guy. And again, from the evidence, as you've laid it out, it seems like this was a pretty, it just sounds like a pretty horrible thing to do. I don't know what we're dealing with. I don't know whether there was a movement. I think we can say with some certainty at this point, Scott, that whether the officer felt threatened or not, it seemed pretty clear that he wasn't. And this is now you get down to the brass tacks. When you are basically asking a police officer and you're saying you need to take more time to be sure before you fire, sometimes you don't have that kind of luxury. Sometimes you've got a half a second to make this decision. I'm very reluctant to put myself in the position of a police officer and tell him how he should have handled it. But we also know that there are people out there that don't belong on the police force, and if it turns out that this was one of them, he needs to face the consequences. I mean, if it's clear cut, right? If he just walked in, saw this black guy and just shot him dead, then he needs to face the consequences of that. And furthermore, the other side of the justice coin, as near as we can get to it, is that I hate to say lawsuit because I'm not generally in favor of these, but somebody in the city of Chicago needs to do their very best to make up to the family of this man the incredible loss that they've inflicted on him and the loss that they've inflicted on the country. I mean, these people, the people that do the kind of things that this man did, are very, very rare, and they're exceedingly precious. And while all of the other discussion that we've had today is just academic, I mean, well, I don't know, the thing I'm feeling the most is I'm feeling the absence of one more of these sheepdogs who are not exactly growing on trees and who paid a horrible price for having the courage to do the right thing. And I suspect that he would have done the right thing regardless, because that's the way people like that are wired, and we're very lucky to have them on this earth.
And let me give a quick clarification and then ask two final questions, which are kind of together. The quick clarification is, I think it's outside the Chicago city limits. It's a suburban community, but it's near
somebody.
Chicago. Yes. And I just didn't want anybody from the Chicago Police Department to be upset about that.
By the way, I think it would be, I think it'd be exceedingly appropriate to start a GoFundMe campaign for this guy, and I think everybody who values the Second Amendment, I think anybody who's ever said a good guy with a gun, I think they need to kick a few bucks into this till.
And that's what I wanted to really ask you is it your position as somebody who's not only a conservative and an advocate of the Second Amendment and a gun owner yourself, but somebody who has actually been an advocate for the National Rifle Association, do you truly believe that America's cities would be safer if more of its black citizens were armed? And then the quick definition question, you used the term sheepdog before. Could you define that, please?
Sure. I'll get to don't let me forget sheepdog. One of the problems with American cities is that too many black Americans are armed. They're armed illegally, and they're armed illegally committing crimes. That's why this guy got shot. Police officers have to deal with the reality of the situation. I remember doing some of the math on this on my Black Lives Matter videos, and I seem to recall that in New York City, a police officer is 25 times more likely to be shot at by a black man than vice versa. And so you've got that whole outside argument there that doesn't directly impact this guy in any way, except that it creates the environment that makes police make this kind of decision. And the black community has a perfect right to be upset about this, and they have. So this is why things like Ferguson bothers me so much, Scott. This is why things like the Black Lives Matter movement bothers me so much. It bothers me because this guy may really genuinely deserve the kind of justice that they were trying to gin up for Michael Brown. I mean, I just don't know how it gets any clearer than this or any more horrible than this. You've got a heroic young private citizen, young black man who's doing everything the way I think and you think and most conservatives think a citizen should do in a situation like this. And then there's a failure of the government, and we should voluntarily do whatever we can to make this situation just, because it is a horrible failure on the part of a system that we believe in. The sheepdog thing, for those of you who haven't heard it, I forget what the gentleman's name was, as a colonel, I want to say, quite a while ago, was basically saying there are three different kinds of people in our society. There are the vast majority of people the enormous majority of people, which he called sheep. And he was immediately quick to say, when we say sheep in this situation, we're not talking about stupid. We're not talking about being, just followers. No negative connotation to it at all. Simply people who could not harm somebody else if if they really wanted to. They're perfectly gentle, kind people, incapable of intentionally harming somebody else. And then around the flock of sheep, there are the wolves. And the wolves are carnivores, and the wolves are not part of the flock, and the wolves don't care about little 1-day-old or 1-hour-old lambs. They don't think they're adorable and cute. It's a food source for them. And wolves will prey on this group of sheep without the slightest bit of remorse whatsoever, at all. They simply will go in there and eat the youngest and the tastiest ones, and that's what wolves do. And then finally, you have a sheepdog who is a creature who lives in both worlds. He looks like a dog. He's got teeth like a dog. He's got claws like a dog. He's capable of biting and fighting like a dog. But his job is to protect the sheep. And one of the problems with the sheepdog situation is that the sheep have a hard time telling which one of these clawed creatures is on their side. So the whole idea of a sheepdog is somebody who is kind and gentle and incapable of hurting other people, and at the same time has the fangs and the claws to be willing to use deadly violence on actual wolves who are preying on the sheep. But I would love to see some kind of campaign started for this man's family. I would certainly contribute to it. And finally, when it's all said and done, Scotty, we have to come to the realization that we live in an imperfect world where terrible things happen, and we should do everything within our power to make sure they don't happen again. I know that the fact that we've had well over almost 20 years now of airline travel in this country without a single fatality on a domestic major carrier. That is an astonishing record. It's astonishing. With 40,000 flights a day, it's an unbelievable safety record. And that safety record was achieved by making sure that everything that caused one accident incorporates the rule changes to make sure that the chance of it happening again is much, much, much lower. And this is the kind of thing we need to be doing. And if that means training for police officers in terms of how to recognize a good guy with a gun, then that's what we're going to have to do.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Whittle now comes to you 5 days a week with Bill's commentary on breaking news of the day and stories that catch in our hearts and captivate our minds. This one is a sad one, and I'm glad we got a chance to talk about it here. I'm sure in the comments section below these videos, you'll also engage in that conversation. If there's a GoFundMe campaign, I'll provide a link for it in the video description below so that those of you who are so moved can do so. And I'm only mentioning it here just in case you miss it, and I want to make sure you don't. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. We thank the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.